Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another discussion on the human person. You may have heard it said sometimes by scientists, philosophers, or even cognitive psychologists that the self is an illusion. It's the kind of statement that sounds profound until you actually stop and think about it. And then you realize that this may be one of the most confused and frankly dangerous ideas circulating in modern intellectual circles today. Let's be blunt. To say the self is an illusion is to abandon the very first principles of coherent thought. It is to destroy the ground from which all meaning, reflection, and experience arise. So let's dissect this and explore two questions. One, what is an illusion? And two, what exactly is the self? Because if we don't know what an illusion is or what the self is, we will never know what's being denied. And we might end up nodding along with nonsense disguised as insight without even realizing it. So, first, what is an illusion? When talking about an illusion, you always have to ask, an illusion as compared to what? And you have to ask what normal perception is. In normal perception, there's an object actually in the environment, and you form a phantasm or image in your mind that correctly corresponds with the object in the environment. An illusion is a misperception of something real, like mistaking a rope for a snake or a shadow for a monster. A hallucination is perceiving an object in the absence of any external stimuli in the environment, such as seeing a cat when there is none. But even illusions require a subject. You cannot have a hallucination or illusion unless there is someone, a person, experiencing the hallucination or illusion. So if someone says the self is an illusion, the right question is whose illusion? Who is being tricked? Who is the one observing the illusion? Who is making the claim? The very act of saying the self is an illusion assumes a self. The self is the very thing doing the experiencing. It's like using your voice to declare that voices don't exist. So now let's talk about the self. What is the self? And there's a reason I'm discussing the self right after discussing the soul. And I'll start by telling you what it isn't. From an Aristotelian Thomistic perspective, the self is not material, not just a passing sensation or a mental construct. It's not reducible to a stream of thoughts, emotions, memories, or personality traits. It's not equivalent to your brain or body. It is not your curious sense of I or your mental model of yourself. The self is something deeper, something ontological. And yes, from a classical perspective, the self is your substantial form, the very essence of what you are as a human being. We had mentioned that form is a principle of stability, immateriality, and actuality. In other words, the self is your soul in the Greek sense, the very same soul we've been discussing, but now considered from a different perspective. Like forms, the self is immaterial. It is not a thing you can point to like a chair or a neuron. Like forms, the self is the ground of actuality. It's the source from which all your abilities and functions, your intellect, your will, your emotions flow. And just as a form is the source of stability, so is the self. It's the reason you are one coherent being rather than just a scattered bundle of neurons, sensations, and shifting memories. It is the foundation, the underlying essence that stays through every change while you remain the same being. The self is in operation when you are awake, asleep, in a coma, dreaming, singing. It is your deepest essence. Why is your joy yesterday and your regret today experienced as yours? Why don't you wake up every morning with a new identity? Why can you look back at a picture from 10 years ago and still say, that was me, even though nearly every part of you has changed? It's because of the self, your substantial form, your soul, your metaphysical identity that underlies and unifies all this change. It's the same reason a tree can drop its leaves and grow new ones and still be the same tree. The continuity doesn't lie in parts. It lies in the form. Again, the same form we've been discussing this entire time. And again, to reiterate, the self is not an object in consciousness. It is a subject through which all consciousness is possible. So where does this confusion come from? Much of it comes from mistaking the contents of consciousness for the subject of consciousness. It's true that your thoughts come and go, your emotions shift, your memories evolve. What many people forget is this: change presupposes something that changes. You cannot have transformation unless something persists through the transformation. You cannot have a thought unless there's a thinker. To say the self is an illusion is like saying the stage doesn't exist because the props keep changing. No, the stage is the only reason the play holds together. But it is important to clarify something. A human being is not just the self. One may say the self or the soul is the deepest layer to a human being, but the human being is still a union of the self and the body, which includes one's emotions, memories, imagination, thoughts, intellect, and will. It would be a mistake to say that because one's emotions or memories can be observed by oneself, and then therefore these faculties or objects are not truly part of the person. No, one is not fully human unless all these faculties work and exist in union. So a complete human being includes the soul or the self and material aspects, the emotions, imagination, the interior faculties, and the body in general. There is another layer to the confusion about the self, one that often slips under the radar. Some people admit that we have a sense of self, that we have an I, but they claim this sense is purely artificial, a construction, a useful fiction. In other words, they believe we have a mental model of ourselves, but that it doesn't correspond to anything real. Now, this is a deeper confusion about the nature of concepts and how concepts relate to reality. It comes from a tendency to conflate our models of reality with reality itself. We confuse our concepts of a thing for the thing itself. Let's return to a familiar example. Think of a cat. When you see a cat, your mind forms a representation of it, a phantasm. And when you understand what a cat is, not just the specific one, but the kind of thing a cat is, you possess within yourself its form. Some modern cognitive scientists and philosophers sometimes say we form concepts of things like cats. And many go further. They say that all we ever really have access to are concepts. So we can't be sure of the reality of the cat outside our mental construction of it. But the Aristotelian Thomistic thinker sees things differently. Yes, we form concepts, but those concepts are how we know the real thing. They are not a replacement or substitute for the thing out there in reality. The forms we grasp are the means by which we know reality. There is an order to things, and our minds are reflections of that order. The order in reality is the following: there are accidents or physical features in the world out there, and there is a substance or form that underlies those features which exists in reality. This is the ontological order. To know the substance, we encounter the accidental or physical features first, and then from the accidents, we abstract out the underlying form or essence, which then becomes a concept in our mind. This is a cognitive order. So we have a concept of the actual substance in reality now existing in our minds. Our concept, when formed properly, mirrors what actually exists. So when you see a cat, what you're really perceiving are its material features, its fur, size, color, its so-called accidents. And through those, you come to grasp its form, its essence, its nature as a cat. The accidents are what change, but the form is what gives it identity. And you come to know the form through a process of abstraction using your intellect. This is how we know anything, and it applies not just to cats or chairs or trees, but very importantly, it applies to ourselves. We know ourselves the way we know anything else in the world. In the classical tradition, all knowledge begins with experience. You must encounter reality before you can abstract its form. So you must first experience cats, real, particular cats, before you can know what a cat is in general. The same holds for yourself. In order to know yourself, you must first experience yourself interacting and engaging with the world. And this can be subtle. We are constantly experiencing ourselves, our shift in emotional states, our reaction to events, our actions, our choices. From this stream of experience, we then form representations of ourselves. And eventually, from those, we form a deeper concept, a sense of our own essence. In short, we carry within us a model of ourselves. And here's where another layer of confusion arises. For just as the concepts we have of a cat or dog is how we come to know the real dog or cat in reality, the phantasm or concepts we have of ourselves is the way we know ourselves. And just as we shouldn't confuse our concepts of the real thing out there, we shouldn't confuse our concept of ourselves with the self. I'll repeat, just as the phantasm we form of a cat is not the cat itself, the representation we form of ourselves is not the self. It's a model, a reflection, a tool. And yes, models can be flawed, just as perceptions can be distorted. We'll talk about how errors in perception, errors in phantasms can lead to disorders like delusions and hallucinations, and maybe even disorders of multiple personalities, or also known as dissociative identity disorder. But even when representations fail, there is still a real subject doing the representing, the real self. The real self is not a phantasm. It is not a mental image. It is not a memory or personality profile. It is not what is known. It is the one who knows. You cannot see or imagine the self. It is not among your thoughts or memories, but it is that deep unity through which all those are yours. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.